Hello, friends. My name is Jennifer Hitchcock. I'm a veteran AP Government teacher, and I'm a veteran AP Government scorer. I've had some experience at scoring essays at the end of the year, and I wanted to share with you what some really great advice might be on how to attack question 4 on the redesigned AP Gov exam, the Argumentation FRQ. So by the time we're done, we'll have a better understanding of why you're being asked to do this skill. We'll take a look at the structure of the questions. We'll look at a prompt, and then we'll get some practice in. And while we're going through this, I do want to tell you that I have far more information on how to break down some of these skills that might be particularly difficult, like writing your thesis, or even making sure that you're going back and checking to make sure you've covered everything. And so I'll be kind of peppering some of that stuff in as we go through today. So our first stop is, why are we doing argumentation? And the answer is easy. This is a really applicable skill to history, law, political science, public policy, winning dinner party debates, anything like that, where you come up with a hypothesis, you have to do research, and then you have to prove whatever you're saying. We're doing a really small version of this, something that's limited to the 40 minutes that's generally suggested for you to write the Argumentation FRQ. And so we've broken it down into some pretty easy steps that hopefully you'll be able to remember when you sit for the exam. We're also going to rely on some language that you may have heard in other social studies and English classes, mostly the claim evidence commentary. Claim is sometimes referred to as an assertion or a thesis, and for our intents and purposes, we're going to treat them as largely similar. A little bit more about claim evidence and commentary. Generally speaking, when you're giving a claim, you're repeating the prompt and then you're giving a position that's defensible. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a couple of slides. You want to make sure when you're dealing with evidence that you're locating logical supporting evidence that's either quantitative, meaning numerical, or qualitative. And you want to summarize it and contextualize it so that you can use it in your commentary. And commentary I think of as glue that kind of mashes together your evidence with your claim, where you're connecting how that evidence shows the world that you are absolutely right in your claim. So onto the structure. And before I get going too far here, I do want to tell you that there's a little trick to the Argumentation FRQ. And that is that the claim is the key point. I'm going to call it a turnkey point. If you do not successfully get your claim point, you are only eligible for one other point out of all of the rest of the 5, and that is point B1 in evidence. And I'll talk more about that in a couple of slides. But I want you to remember that. I'm going to say that again and again and again, that if the claim isn't successfully done, you are limiting yourself. There was some kind of little, some controversy when the AP scores came out in 2019, because indeed the AP score for Argumentation FRQ is bimodal, meaning that there are 2 peaks where most people scored in a 1 and similar between 3 and 4. And the reason why is because of this whole issue with the claim. So for our purposes, we're going to assume that College Board isn't going to change anything, and I'm going to run through how to tackle the Argumentation FRQ as I would teach it in my class. I do want to tell you that I tell my kids that we're going to make the assumption that the most conservative, stodgy, old person in the world who does not believe in College Board is scoring your FRQ, and they absolutely do not want to give you any points. So I'm going to overteach how to write an FRQ so that we can convince even the skeptics that you know how to do this skill and you know how to do it well. So let's take a look at our claim. A critical thing here is that it's not just stating a fact, which is not a claim. It's not just taking a position on something, which is a claim. I believe that the sky is green. It's also telling people why you think that, and that's what makes it defensible. So I have a little formula that's, about halfway down your page right here that I put up on my board as a crutch for my students to help them remember how to deal with this claim issue. And the first thing that I always want them to do is to already plot out what your counter is going to be. So we introduce our counter as the first point, and I just say, despite Z, whatever your counter is with a why or how. Then we're going to do our next part, which is to reword the prompt as a statement. Now that's not a claim yet because I haven't taken a position. And so after I've reworded my prompt, I have to take that position, and to make it defensible, I then need to say why or how that's possible. Some things for us to also remember as we're going through this is really remember to answer the question. So often I find that kids have misread something, they did not outline. I know outlining seems like we don't have time to do it, but it's a really wise investment of your time because it allows you to go back and back check to kind of create your own rubric. And some other little persnickety things. Pronouns are awful. They really make your writing very difficult to discern who the players are in the sentence. Using past tense voice makes it difficult to see that there's action happening. And those are, believe it or not, really important. And oftentimes writing comes down to, did I actually see this person or this institution doing the thing that you're talking about? And then try your best to make sure to remember naming relevant abstract ideas, things that you learned in class that were probably drilled into you a million times that are implied in the prompt. If all of this is not enough on the claim front, on the video links, I will put in a link to my blog, which goes into a little bit more detail on how to tackle the claim. All right, moving on to evidence. So evidence can be a little tough, and so I'm going to try to slow down a little bit in this section and make sure that it makes sense how this all flushes out. So the first thing, of course, is if you don't get the claim, you're only eligible for the B1 point. The B1 point is kind of like, I don't know, College Board's way of giving you a parting gift. You don't want just the B1 point, you want all of them. So let's consider B1 and B2 together and B3 separately. The critical thing here is that you have a list of several required documents that you absolutely need to know in this class. And College Board is going to incentivize your deep understanding of these documents, the authors, their intent, the context, the message, the argument, and how they connect to each other by giving you 2 points on an essay, on this essay. That first point is your insurance plan. It's, I didn't get the claim, but I at least got 1 point. And what you have to do to get that 1 point is you have to successfully match the required documents, ideas, or general topic to the general topic of this essay. That's it. So like Federal 78 is about the judiciary, and this topic is about the judiciary, something along those lines. You want to go beyond that because that's not sufficient to support any kind of argument whatsoever. So we need to tailor that evidence. We need to kind of sift through the words and the ideas that are in each of these documents and pull out the threads that are really the most important that make a solid argument work. And that's what you get for B2. So B2 is again going back to that first required doc, which is in a list of 3. And if you can tailor that evidence in a way that supports your claim and you already have your claim point, then you have earned B2. B3 is relatively easy as well. It's just a second document, which we'll get into in a moment, a little bit how that works, that again has relevant and specific pieces of tailored evidence that supports your claim. Now, you can use the other 2 given documents that are located on the FRQ, or you can go fishing external to that based on your own knowledge. When you go fishing external to that, remember the same thing is true for staying on task. Tell who the author is, explain kind of a little bit of the context if you can, and then make sure that you're clear about why that evidence is particularly helpful to your claim. In my own classroom, one of the things that I'm going to be focusing on is asking kids to stay on the list of 3 documents that are presented to them because it gives them an even playing field. One of the things as a scorer that can be difficult is if kids are pulling random pieces of evidence from random corners of the country that I'm not familiar with. Not to say that it impacts your grade, because it doesn't at all. What it does do is it slows the reader down because they might have to go and do some research on it. So I want a reader to sit at my essay and just read it from start to finish without having to do any further investigation. So that's kind of my conservative approach on how to try to get these points. Make sure that you're not just restating your claim And one of the things that I also will tell kids who feel a little hesitant is to use our transition words. I think of turn signals on a car when I think of transition words. They're indicating like a blinker. I'm going to turn left, then I'm going to turn into this piece of evidence. So consider using transitions just for the purposes of this quick write, of using things like for example, thus, for instance, to illustrate, etc. And then we move on to commentary. So commentary, again, connecting that evidence back to whatever our claim might be. And again, if you have not successfully earned your claim, you're not going to get this point, even if you attempt it. So how does it connect, right? Tell me how or why, answering the question because. My evidence is great to answer this because it supports my claim because. Try to make sure that you really get that there. Sometimes it might require some reasoning processes, things like classifying, things like coming up with processes or referring back to processes that governments might do, thinking of cause and effect or comparison, similarities and differences. Another turn signal that I give my kids is this shows my claim is true because. So, kind of restating your claim. It's not something that I would do in a longer piece of writing that required editing, but for the purposes of a quick write, if you remember kind of, oh, I need to show this, it's an indicator to you and it's an indicator to the scorer that you're making an attempt. Whether or not it's accurate or not is to be determined. And then we get to the counter. So the counter is our last point. This is our D point. And again, no claim, no counter. You have options here. You can concede, you can rebut, or you can rebut, sorry. I was rhyming. A refutal is, I think, what I typically see the most, where a kid says, yes, there is an idea out there that is counter to mine. I'm introducing my idea, which you will have to do, this idea that's counter to mine. But it exists in a world beyond just being there, but you have to have an argument. So they will say it's false because of this. A rebuttal is when you contradict something you've already said. So yes, I said this, but in reality, it's this. A little harder to do. And then a concession, I can really see a concession coming into play if a student really wants an easy argument, but they don't really believe it. So they might write an FRQ that goes for the easy argument and then concede it at the end to the argument you had a harder time making. Again, I think, in my personal opinion, making sure that we're making an insurance policy, that we're earning the points, you might want to give some evidence and show how it connects back to the counterclaim, because a counterclaim, just stating that it exists, isn't sufficient. You kind of have to work with it a little bit to show that refuting a rebuttal or concession. Okay, so we're going to take a look at a prompt. And you might want to think, what claims are possible when you get your prompt. You might want to think, okay, here's my list of three possible required evidence that's necessary. All of this comes back to, coming up with an outline to make sure that you're checking off all of those points. So these are the questions that I would be asking and then furiously outlining before I turn the corner to writing my FRQ. And here's our sample. So this is a good point for you to pause the video and to read what's said. Okay, so for the most part, you'll notice that the text in the top will change. That's our prompt. But when it says in your essay you must, that's not going to change. That will be consistent. The only thing that will shift are the documents or pieces of evidence that you have options to use. One thing to note is that I would recommend only using the Constitution once. I know that there's several clauses in a Bill of Rights, but we're going to consider them one, and you should only use them once. The other thing is, I, again, don't think it's a bad idea. You won't get penalized. I think it just makes the reader have an easier time reading it, and that might make them be like, oh, cool, like it's easier to read this by using another piece of evidence provided. And I'm going to do that in my sample to show you what that looks like. Again, the rubrics are fixed, so this is going to stay the same. And you have those 6 points over 4 components, one being the turnkey for A1, only earning the first evidence if you don't get that A1 point. And it is something that requires full flowing sentences. All right, so our practice. Practice what you preach. Here's my outline. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to work things around, right? I've weighed my different perspectives and I picked a claim, and whichever one I felt was a good counter argument, I slid down to the bottom. Okay. So here in my claim, and I put a little blurb before that, which you really don't have to do. You can just start with your claim. And my claim is the bolded text here. And I color-coded it because I wanted you to see the different parts. So from where it says, although critics of judicial independence feared independent courts would undermine the authority of the states, comma, that's my counter. That's an insurance plan. That's me holding myself accountable to covering D later. And maybe, just maybe, in some wild world, if I run out of time, if I already have introduced it, maybe I'll get that point for a counterclaim. I don't know. You never know. So in my mind, I'm like, why not? It won't hurt you. Then you see in green, or the mint color, this is a restating of the prompt, the creation of an independent judiciary. And then yellow, this is my position. It's really short. It's not tyrannical. Now I have to tell you why. And so you see because in the really light green, and that's where I get into the constitutional guarantee of term of good behavior. So I've told you why I don't believe the independent judiciary is tyrannical. Again, if you're kind of stuck on this, there's resources that I will have posted that can help you get unstuck on how to write a great claim. So this is a little more colorful because I want to show you that I have evidence and commentary together. Going back to our CEC format, if you recall, C, claim, is the first one, and then I have 2 pieces of evidence that I have to throw in here. So yellow is E, and purple is commentary, or C. So it's CEC, EC is my pattern. All right, so my evidence, I've stated exactly what I'm talking about. Article 3 of the Constitution, you know without a doubt who I'm talking about. And then I'm going to sift through the document and find the information that I think best serves my case. And that it's this idea of not diminishing pay of courts and a term of good behavior. That's my evidence. My commentary talks about how those 2 facts can help protect or insulate the court from pressure, either withholding pay or termination in retribution for unpopular decisions. Like, I have to show thinking there, and I have to explain, okay, this is why those 2 things create a independent judiciary. And then I need to come back around and talk about why that's not tyrannical. And so we get to my second piece of evidence, Alexander Hamilton in Federal 78. We know what document I'm talking about. And then he talks about the powers of interpretation are not nearly as powerful and therefore tyrannical as the Congress power of the purse and president's power of the sword. So that's all factual information that indeed comes from, and I've sifted through because there's a lot more stuff in Federal 78. And now I need to connect it. Why does that help prevent tyranny? And so I say, oh, well, what can Congress do with the power of the purse? They can take money away. When that can be tyrannical, right? It can hurt a program's effectiveness. That's that tyrannical action. What can the president do? They enforce law, and sometimes that enforcement goes, sour. So I'm making really strong connections, and I have at the end, you see tyranny over and over and over again because I want to reiterate that my prompt is being answered. So at this point, if this was my FRQ, I would be scoring a 5 out of 6 because I'm really making sure that I'm consistent. And so that leaves us for the last thing, which is the counter, right? So I'm going to acknowledge that Hamilton had a really good reason, but there's a belief that the courts are built to be tyrannical. And here's my evidence that Brutus thought it would erode state sovereignty, blah, 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 blah. I go on to give further evidence, which really isn't even necessary, about Brown v. Board. Southern states felt it undermined their sovereignty. And so that would be helpful to really proving that. And then you see the word yet, which this means I am doing a refutation. The same southern states chose to ignore the court's demand for integration under massive resistance. It took that action did not happen nationwide. So I'm countering their argument to make sure that I earn that final point. So in sum, we've walked through all the different parts of this, and I wanted to give you this final option here about how to go back and self-check. And so a lot of the same questions that I asked myself, I've gone ahead and I've typed up into this document on my website that you can pull down and kind of have next to you to make sure that you're doing your best when you're practicing so that those skills translate over to when you're actually taking the test in May. And so we've gone through argumentation and why we do it. We've looked at the structure. We've played around with the prompt and done some practice. And hopefully at this point, you'll feel a lot better about sitting for this portion of the AP exam. I wish you the best of luck this year.